Hey guys, happy Sunday to all of you. It's so great to be here again today. And my name is Edith, and I will be talking about seizures, some of the myths and facts, about seizures, and then how to safely manage someone who is going through a seizure. Let me position this really nicely. All right. So I'm sure some of you must have heard a few things about seizures. Actually, a couple of years ago, I was in a bus stop. I was waiting for a bus, and this young, nice-looking gentleman just fell down and began to have seizures. And then nobody wanted to go close to him. Everybody just stood away from him and watched him, roll on the floor. And he was unconscious and didn't know what he was doing. So I had to step in and try to at least protect the environment where he was in, just so that he didn't hurt himself any further. Yeah, so that brings us to seizures, myths, and facts, and then safety guidelines. So I'll be talking a little bit today about some of these things that you might have heard about people who have seizures, and how you can actually approach someone who has a seizure should you eventually come across one. So I'm sure you probably heard about people having seizures and swallowing their tongues. That's not true. That is not true. It's not possible to swallow your tongue. I'm sure you also heard that, when someone is seizing, it is right to just put something in their mouth to prevent the teeth from locking together. Yeah, I know I used to hear that when I was a child, and maybe I probably have tried to do that back in the days, but, we know much better now, and it is not true. Now, you probably have heard that when someone is seizing, you should, hold them together, or, protect them and keep them from, having those muscular contractions. Now, that's not true. You cannot stop the person from having those contractions because they are not deliberate. They're not voluntary. Now, I'm sure you already heard that epilepsy or seizure is contagious. I used to hear that as a child, that you don't go close to someone who's having a seizure, because what it means is that the person is having a demonic attack. That is not true. Seizures are not demonic attacks. We'll find out a little bit more about them. And then I'm sure you also heard that only kids have seizures. That's not true. Adults have seizures. Older people have seizures, some from strokes and some heart diseases, and yes, they have seizures and they have epilepsy also. I'm sure you've also heard that seizures or epilepsy is a disability. And then when someone has a seizure, they automatically become disabled and can't function like normal human beings. Now, that is not true, except if there are other things that come with the epilepsy. So if the individual becomes, mentally, challenged from the whole incident, or hurt themselves, and they're not able to function in their normal capacity, then yes, they might have some restrictions, but it does not mean in any way that they're less of any humans. Okay, so I'll also talk a little bit about some of the myths that we must have heard, that epilepsy is rare and people don't usually have it. Well, that might be true, but of course, I will talk a little bit about epilepsy when we further go down into this topic. I'm sure you also heard that you can't wait to tell what someone might be doing. So you think the people who are having seizures know what they're doing. No, that's not true. They do not know what they're doing. And even after the seizure, they don't remember anything. So now I'll talk a little bit about the history of seizures or epilepsy. Epilepsy comes from the Greek word meaning possession. Back in the days, the Greeks believed that seizures were caused by demon possession and regarded them as a spiritual phenomenon. So they thought it was something that was actually driven by evil spirits. But no, science and research has shown that there is more to seizures than meets the eye. Also, the true nature of epilepsy has been long distorted by myths and fears. People have been so scared. And back a few years ago, it used to cause a lot of damages for the people that are seizing, because someone falls down, there's a fire close by, and they roll into the fire, or there is a glass and they cut themselves. and I mean, people have died from seizures, but thanks to science, thanks to medicine, the case is totally different today. All right, so what are seizures? I'm sure you've probably been wondering what are seizures. You must have known someone, you may have seen someone, you may have heard, that someone has a seizure and you're like, oh my God, yeah. So what is a seizure? A seizure is a sudden, uncontrolled electrical disturbance in the brain. So it's sudden, it's uncontrolled, it's a disturbance. It's not something that is usual. So it happens, it's just like a trigger. It just happens, and then the individual goes into a state of unconsciousness. Now it can result in temporary changes in behavior. They might pass out, they might blank out, they might be very quiet for a while, and then it can also change in movement. Sometimes, depending on the kind of seizure, the individual might be calm, they might have excessive jerking movements, they might throw themselves around and all of that. And it could also result in changes in the level of consciousness, or how aware the individual is of him or herself and his or her environment. Now, it may go unnoticed in some people, like when they have the absent seizures or the partial seizures. And then in some other cases, the unconsciousness might be really, really severe, and you can see them actually convulsing. Now, seizures are not all alike. Not everybody has the same kind of seizure, or not everybody who has a seizure has the same kind of, symptom or sign, or whatever, however we choose to refer to it. Some people have the very extreme types of seizures, some others are very mild. So regardless of what it is, a seizure can be as a result of a medication. It can be a result of a fever. And we're going to talk a little more about this when we go further into the program. So there are two types of seizures, majorly two types of seizures. One is the focal, and the other is the generalized. Now, for the focal, it could also be referred to as a partial seizure. It starts from one part of the brain and then gradually triggers to the other parts of the brain. So now, when this starts in this local area, it could cause really mild symptoms. But again, as it begins to spread, then the symptoms begin to increase, right? So the same thing, relates to the generalized seizure. Just as the word implies, or the name implies, it means that it is generalized. It's in every part of the brain. So when this happens, the individual begins to have general body jerky movement, or begin to have seizure-related symptoms. Now, this spreads to both sides of the brain, and they can also occur as a generalized onset seizure, in which the activities start simultaneously on both sides of the brain, affecting everything on both sides of the body. Okay, so next is I'll talk about how people get seizures, and then some of the little things that we do or we kind of neglect that might actually result in a seizure. Now, genetically, I'm sure a lot of you I've had the question, I've had people ask me about the genetic component of seizure, or the genetic susceptibility of seizures. Absolutely. In many cases, especially with not seizures, but epilepsy, it could run in the family. And then that is why, if you know that you have a family history of epilepsy, it's very important for you to take precautionary measures so as not to get yourself hurt should it happen anywhere down the line. Now, there are so many symptoms of seizures because there are two types of seizures, and then these different types of seizures come with different symptoms. So I want us all to listen very attentively, because I'll be running through them just so that we keep our time here very short. The first is an uncontrolled spastic movement. So they have this kind of jerky, like spastic movement. I actually saw one a few days ago, and it was just like a muscle spasm. Her left shoulder was, spasming, and she was having a seizure. Now, there could also be stiffening and then loosening, which is pretty much the spasm and the jerking. There could be loss of consciousness. They could pass out. The individual will become completely or partially unaware of what is going on around them. They could also be staring into space. So with the absent seizures, sometimes you see the individual just stare blankly into space, and you might think they're watching you or they're looking at you, but no, they're not looking at you. Something is happening to them, and they are not aware of it. So regardless of, you standing in front of them, they have no idea what's going on. Also, the individual might be confused, or usually they are confused, and then there is a sudden emotional state that includes a feeling of doom. They kind of feel really down. They feel like, like something really bad is about to happen. They could have sweating and nausea. Usually it happens. And then they could have an involuntary movement of the tongue, because of course the tongue is muscular also. And then some people could scream and cry, depending on how, the symptoms come along. There could also be rapid blinking, like they start blinking their eyes really fast. And then some people fall on the ground. Others just remain wherever they are, depending on the type of seizures that they are having. All right, so there are certain things that can cause a seizure. And of course, I remember telling us whenever I started this program, the goal of this program is to create an awareness. You would be so amazed that, people, despite the availability of the internet, books and, the heights that medicine has gotten to, a lot of people still do not know a lot of things. And that is why I am doing this. I am doing this out of, this is out of passion. This is what I love to do. And I love all the feedbacks that I've gotten so far. And by God's grace, I will continue to bring you more information as regards preventive health care. Now, this is in no way going to diagnose, or I'm not going to be accessing anybody or diagnosing anybody. I am just going to tell you some of the things you should be looking out for, how to prevent illnesses. And of course, if you find yourself having any of the symptoms, please, as much as possible, go see a doctor or a professional who can help you. Now, back to my topic, there are certain things that can cause a seizure. Okay, now we're having COVID-19. I remember one of the symptoms of COVID is high fevers. Now, if someone is having a really high fever, 101, 102, 104, especially in kids, they can actually have seizures. So if someone is having a fever can actually cause a seizure. Now, strokes can cause seizures because what happens with a stroke, there is a disturbance in blood flow. So when there is that blockage in the brain or wherever, and there is and a disturbance and the blood is not able to flow, what happens? The individual can have a seizure. Now, brain tumors can cause seizures. Cancers can cause seizures. So if someone just all of a sudden starts having a seizure, you might want to go see your doctor to check out and make sure that you don't have a tumor present on, the nerves in the brain. Now, head injuries, it could be a long-term head injury that was not noted, or you probably got over it and forgot about it. 20 years after, something pops up from somewhere related to the injury, and then the individual starts to have a seizure. So these are certain things you need to really think about. Electrolyte imbalance, sodium imbalance, potassium imbalance, calcium imbalance, an imbalance in your electrolyte intake can result in seizure. Dehydration. So dehydration can cause seizures. You need to, as much as possible, drink a lot of water. You need to keep yourself well hydrated, especially in the summer, in the heat period. You need to keep yourself really hydrated. Very low blood sugar, repeated flashing lights, excessive TV, video games, anything that sends a lot of signals to the brain can actually distort the electrical conduction of the brain. Some medications can actually result in seizures, antipsychotics, and then you will be so surprised that some asthma medications can also cause seizures. Now, people withdrawing from medications like some anxiety medications can actually have seizures. Brain infections like meningitis can lead to seizures. And I, of course, mentioned the big one, which is COVID-19. And this is the period we are in. Nobody knows, nobody really understands, the whole pathophysiology of this disease. But one thing I know is that with the very high fevers, it could actually result in a seizure. Okay, so what do you do when someone has a seizure? I know a lot of people have had this notion, don't go close to someone having a seizure. Like I said, put something in their mouth, maybe a stick to prevent their teeth from, clenching together, or hold their tongues. Yes, I heard some really weird things, or, or maybe tie them up or something. Yeah. But please, when someone is having a seizure, the first thing you want to do is ease the person to the floor. You don't want the person to fall and break their heads or break their spine. So you want to help them gradually ease them to the floor, to a very flat surface, because they're going to be doing a lot of rolling. So you want to make sure that they're in a position where even when they roll, they are not going to fall off and hurt themselves even more. Then you want to turn the person to the side. The reason you want to turn the person to the side is so that if there are secretions, if there is anything coming out from the mouth, saliva or whatever, it can just roll down to the side, as opposed to going back into the throat and then causing the person to aspirate or choke on the saliva. Now you want to clear the area of anything sharp. Make sure that there is no knife, there is no glass, there is no fire. If there is candle or a bulb or something, you want to make sure that it's not close to the person, because you don't know how much or how long the seizure is going to last and what activities are actually going to be happening. So as much as possible, keep the person and the area very safe. Now put something soft and flat, maybe like a pillow, right under their head, just to support the neck. If they have eyeglasses, anything that can break and get into their eyes, if they have a tie, if they have a belt, if they have rings or wristwatches, you want to take it aside. Just anything that has a tendency for restricting blood flow or oxygen intake. Now, I already mentioned, taking away, anything that prevents them from getting adequate oxygen intake. Now, do not try to stop the person. Do not try to hold the person down. Do not try to, don't scream, don't panic. It can be really panicky. The few times I've seen people have seizures, they were panicky and they thought I was panicky, because at that point, the individual feels, how someone who feels completely powerless, like they feel like something bad, like they're going to die, So the first thing you want to do as someone who is hearing this message today is make sure you are calm. Be very, very calm. Be very calm and be very, very, pay attention to how long the seizure lasts, to the kind of movements that the person is having. And of course, like I said, make sure that the area is safe. And then try to call for 911 help, any emergency care that you can get. Do not try to put anything in the person's mouth, because what can happen, at that point, all the muscles really contract. The teeth is strong. It can break that material you're putting in the mouth, and the material can go into the person's throat and cause them to choke and die. And you don't want to do that. Now, when someone is having a seizure, that is not a time for you to try to do CPR. You don't do CPR except there is no pulse in that individual. They're not breathing. So as long as the individual is having that seizure, they are very much alive. Just allow the brain activity to, pass on, and then the individual is going to be okay. And then, you can attend to the person, but do not try to do mouth to mouth resuscitation. Do not try to stick anything anywhere in the person's, in any entrance, the nose, the mouth, the eye. Don't do that. And then that is not a time when you want to give them food or water. You want to wait until the whole seizure ends and the individual is able to regain consciousness before you offer them anything. Now, if they say they want to drink, you want to make sure that they can swallow, at least get them to swallow their own saliva before you offer them something to drink. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about epilepsy. Epilepsy is quite different. It's very different from seizure. It's not quite different. Epilepsy is when someone has recurring seizures. So seizures happen, like I said, it could be as a result of a medication. It could be as a result of dehydration. So it could be like a one-time thing. But then when it begins to happen over and over again, then the individual is said to have epilepsy. But there are other cases. I wouldn't want to go into that when the individual has back to back seizures, that's a whole different ball game. But in the meantime, I hope that I've been able to drive home this point of safety, and then awareness. If you have someone who is undergoing a seizure, please make sure they're safe, and then try to stay hydrated. Try to make sure that you take good care of yourself. Don't wait until you have an emergency to go to the doctor's office. An annual visit to the doctor's office will save you a whole lot. Thank you so much for watching this program, and I hope to see you again next week. Until then, have a blessed new week. Bye-bye.